The station was too quiet, too empty. Lieutenant Aaron felt it in his bones the moment he stepped off the shuttle. The air was still, like the whole place had been holding its breath for days. Only broken lights hummed above him, flickering with a tired pulse casting long shadows across the metal walls. It didn't look like a place for the living anymore. It looked like a grave. Aaron had seen too many graves. The war with the Kethrians had stripped everything from him. First his colony, burned to ash in a single orbital strike. Then his squad, lost one by one in missions that Command swore were worth the cost. And finally his brother Elias. Aaron could still hear his brother's voice in the comms, calm even as the enemy closed in, telling him to keep moving. That was the last time he heard him. The silence that followed was the kind that cut deeper than any blade. Now Command had given Aaron one more mission. Check this abandoned outpost for survivors. Another name on a list. Another ghost hunt. He didn't argue. He never argued anymore. Orders gave him something to follow, something to keep him walking when the weight of his losses told him to stop. The halls stretched before him, narrow and dark, filled with the stench of burnt wiring and stale air. His boots echoed on the metal floor, each step too loud. He kept his rifle close, though part of him wondered if there was even a reason. If the Kethrians had been here, no one would be left alive. Still, he searched. That was the human way, wasn't it? To search even when hope had no place left to stand. He checked one room after another. Crew quarters, empty. Med bay, empty. Control room, destroyed. His chest felt heavier with every door he opened. He told himself he was used to disappointment, that he had stopped caring. But deep inside, a tiny part of him still wanted to hear a voice, any voice, even a stranger's, to remind him that he wasn't alone in this endless war. And then, he heard it. A sound. Soft. Barely there. Like the scrape of movement against metal. Aaron froze. His hand tightened around his rifle. His first thought was enemy patrols. His second thought was a trick of the mind. He had been alone too long, hearing things in silence. But then it came again, softer, weaker. A whimper. Aaron's heart jumped. He followed the sound down the corridor, past broken panels and leaking pipes until he reached a maintenance duct half hidden behind a loose grate. He crouched low, flashlight sweeping the shadows. Two eyes stared back at him. Not human, not Kethrian, either. Something else. Something delicate glowing faintly in the dark. The figure shifted, pulling back as if expecting him to strike. She was small, thin, her skin pale with a soft silver sheen that caught the light. Her clothing was torn, marked with burns. She looked both proud and afraid, as though she wanted to stand tall but had no strength left. For a long moment, neither moved. Aaron's breath caught in his throat. He recognized her species, Ceres, a young diplomat from the Alaran delegation. He remembered seeing her image in reports, one of the few who had tried to speak peace before the war spiraled out of control. What in the stars was she doing here? Don't... Her voice cracked, sharp with fear, though it trembled with weakness. Don't hurt me. Aaron slowly lowered his rifle. His training told him to stay cautious. His instincts told him she wasn't a threat. What threat could a starving, trembling diplomat be in a place like this? I'm not here to hurt you, he said quietly. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, rough from days of silence. I'm human. Lieutenant Aaron. You're safe now. She blinked at him as if she didn't believe him, as if the word human carried weight she couldn't yet trust. Finally, her body sagged, exhaustion overtaking her pride. She crawled out of the duct, stumbling into the open. Her knees buckled, and Aaron caught her before she hit the floor. She was cold. Too cold. He could feel her shivering through his gloves. 3 days, she whispered, voice barely there. Hiding, waiting. Thought. No one would come. Aaron looked around the ruined station, the silence pressing in again. He thought of his brother's last words, of the empty graves left in the wake of war. He had come here expecting to find nothing but death. Instead, he had found her. A spark. It wasn't much. Just one survivor in a galaxy full of loss. But for the first time in a long time, Aaron felt like maybe, just maybe, this mission was different. And though he didn't yet know why, he swore to himself that he would not let her die. Not here. Not now. Aaron half carried her through the station, corridors, careful not to let her stumble again. She was lighter than he expected, fragile in a way that made him wonder how she had survived this long. Her breathing was shallow, her steps unsteady, yet her eyes never stopped scanning the shadows around them. Even half-starved and trembling, she carried herself with a stubborn kind of pride. They moved slowly, each hallway stretching into darkness. Aaron's flashlight caught signs of the battle that had happened here. Burn marks on the walls, shattered panels, a streak of dried blood across the floor. The enemy had passed through, but for some reason, they hadn't found her. Or perhaps, they had assumed no one could live this long alone. Eventually, he found an officer's quarters with a working lock. The door slid shut behind them, and for the first time since landing, Aaron felt like they had a barrier between themselves and the rest of the galaxy. The room was small but intact, a bed against the far wall, a desk scattered with old datapads, and a cracked screen that still hummed with a faint glow. Aaron set her gently on the chair. She leaned back, her silver skin pale against the dark metal, her breathing ragged. For a moment, she closed her eyes as though just sitting felt like a luxury. "Water," she whispered. Aaron dug into his pack, pulling out a sealed ration flask. She took it with shaking hands, drinking greedily before forcing herself to stop, as if ashamed of her own desperation. He pretended not to notice, giving her the space to keep her dignity. "Thank you," she said after a moment, her voice steadier now. The words seemed hard for her, as though gratitude was not something she often gave. Aaron gave a short nod and turned his attention to the room. He checked the door twice, then moved to the bed. The sheets were old but clean. The power grid here was still running, enough to give them lights and maybe some heat. He ran his hand across the blanket and realized there was only one bed, one blanket. He pushed the thought away. Survival came first. Everything else could wait. Behind him, she spoke again. "You are human, yes?" "Yes." He kept his tone neutral. She studied him, her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. "They say humans are reckless, that you throw yourselves at death without care, that you fight because you cannot do anything else." Aaron almost laughed, though there was no humor in it. "They're not wrong." Her gaze softened just slightly. "And yet you found me. You carried me. Why?" The question caught him off guard. He had no answer that made sense, not even to himself. He thought of Elias, of the squad mates he had lost, of how often he had been told to leave people behind, because survival demanded it. And yet here he was, refusing to do it. "Because you're still alive," he said at last. "That's reason enough." For the first time she looked away, as though the weight of his words was too heavy. He saw her jaw tighten, her pride warring with the vulnerability she didn't want to show. The silence stretched between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't easy either. Aaron busied himself checking his rifle, ration packs, and the emergency beacon in his kit. He doubted command would send reinforcements in time, if at all. They were on their own. Hours passed. The station groaned around them, metal shifting as though the whole place remembered what it had lost. When night cycle came, the dim lights above flickered and darkened. Aaron finally sat down on the floor back against the wall. His body ached, but he ignored it. He had learned long ago that pain was just another part of living. She stood, weak but determined, and looked at the bed. Her voice broke the silence, softer this time, almost hesitant. "There is only one bed," she said. Aaron froze. For a moment, he thought he had misheard her. But when he looked up, he saw the faintest smile on her lips, tired yet genuine. Not mocking, not flirtatious, simply human in its own way. She slid closer, her movements slow, deliberate. It wasn't about comfort or romance, it was survival. Her species needed warmth, and his presence was heat and safety in the cold dark of the station. Still, the act carried something deeper. Trust. Aaron's throat tightened. He hadn't been this close to another being in years. The war had stolen that from him. To feel someone's presence, to share the same breath, the same fragile moment of peace, it felt almost unreal. He said nothing. She said nothing. And yet, as she settled beside him, leaning lightly against his shoulder, Aaron realized that silence didn't always have to mean emptiness. Sometimes silence meant survival. Sometimes it meant connection. And for the first time since the war began, Aaron did not feel entirely alone. The room was dim, the lights above flickering in tired rhythm. Outside, the station groaned, its metal bones shifting like an old creature remembering its wounds. Inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. Just the faint hum of the air system and the sound of two people breathing. Aaron sat on the edge of the bed, his rifle leaning against the wall within reach. His mind wandered as it often did at night. He thought about Elias again, his brother's steady voice, the last words spoken through static. He thought about his squad mates, the laughter they had shared, the silence that had replaced it. Memories pressed heavy on his chest, threatening to crush him, and then she spoke. Her voice was soft, carrying both hesitation and something lighter, something fragile. "There's only one bed," she said. Aaron blinked, pulling himself out of his thoughts. He turned his head and saw her standing a few feet away, silver skin reflecting the faint light. She wore the faintest smile, small and uncertain, but real. For someone who had spent 3 days in darkness and fear, it was a surprising thing to see. For a long second, he didn't know how to answer. His training screamed at him to keep distance, to remain professional. But his heart, hollow and aching, stirred at the warmth in her expression. It had been so long since anyone had looked at him without suspicion, without fear, without expecting him to simply fight and die. She didn't wait for him to respond. Slowly, she crossed the small room, her movements unsteady but determined. Her smile didn't fade, though he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She lowered herself onto the bed beside him, careful, like someone testing a fragile bridge. Then, with a small breath, she slid closer. Aaron froze. It wasn't romance. It wasn't even comfort, not exactly. It was survival. Her species lived in warmth and closeness. Touch meant life for her. Still, there was something deeper in the gesture. Trust. She was offering him a closeness that was more than physical. She was allowing herself to believe that he was safe, that he would not harm her, that in this cold and broken place she could lean on him. Her shoulder brushed his arm. She was cold, her body trembling with weakness, and the contact made his chest tighten. Carefully, he shifted the blanket over both of them. She let out a small sigh, her head resting lightly against him. For a while, neither spoke. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't empty this time. It carried weight. It carried meaning. Aaron's thoughts, always sharp with regret and loss, softened. He remembered what it felt like to sit beside someone without waiting for gunfire to interrupt. He remembered that before war, before death, there had been moments like this. Simple, human moments. Her voice broke the quiet, low and steady. "You talk in your sleep," she whispered. Aaron stiffened. "What?" "You said a name," she explained, her eyes half closed. Elias. The word cut him like a blade. He turned his face away, jaw tightening. "My brother," he muttered. "He didn't make it." For a moment she said nothing. Then her hand, small and trembling, found his. The touch was gentle, hesitant, but it didn't let go. "I thought I was alone," she admitted, her words breaking like thin glass. When the fighting came, when the others died, I thought no one would find me. I thought it was over. But you came. Aaron's throat tightened. He wanted to say something, but words felt clumsy, too small. He only squeezed her hand once, silently promising what he couldn't voice. Her breathing slowed, becoming softer as sleep finally claimed her. She leaned against him, trusting him with the weight of her body, the weight of her fear. Aaron sat, still staring into the dim light, listening to the sound of her steady breaths. Something fragile had begun to form between them, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was connection. It was the first crack in the wall he had built around his heart. And in that moment, with her sleeping against his shoulder, Aaron realized that maybe he wasn't completely lost. Maybe, after everything, he could still be human. The lights of the outpost flickered as if the whole station was breathing unevenly. Aaron sat awake, back against the cold wall while Sarah slept beside him. She had leaned into him during the night, seeking warmth, her head resting lightly against his arm. For hours, he had not moved. Not because he was uncomfortable, but because he was afraid that if he shifted, if he disturbed this fragile moment of peace, it would all disappear. When she finally stirred, the artificial light had already shifted into the station's day cycle. She blinked awake slowly, her silver eyes meeting his. For a second there was no tension, no war, just two souls staring at each other in silence. "You did not sleep," she said softly, noticing the weariness on his face. Aaron shrugged, pretending it didn't matter. "I'm used to it." Her gaze lingered on him, studying him in a way that felt almost too deep. Then with quiet determination she asked, "Who was Elias?" The question caught him like a sudden blow. He had not expected her to remember, to ask. For a moment, he wanted to shut it down, to bury the pain as he always did. But something about her voice, the gentleness of it, the way she wasn't demanding but simply offering space, broke through the walls he had kept for so long. Aaron drew a slow breath. "My brother. He was the better one, smarter, kinder. Everyone liked him. We fought together until we didn't." His voice cracked at the last word and he quickly pressed his lips together. Sarah shifted closer, her hand resting on her lap, waiting but not pushing. "What happened?" "He stayed behind so I could escape." Aaron's voice was low, raw. "I told him I would come back. I promised. But by the time I returned, the Kethrians had already—" His throat closed around the memory. There was nothing left. The silence that followed was heavy, not empty but full of pain. Aaron expected her to say something comforting, something polite, but instead she whispered, "I lost my sister." Aaron turned his head. For the first time her proud mask slipped, her eyes glistened, her jaw trembled. "She believed in peace. She thought we could talk to your kind, find a way to stop all this. She was there at the first strike. When the fires came, I held her hand, but the smoke—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I ran. I lived. She didn't." Aaron stared at her, stunned. For so long he had thought of the war as humans versus Kethrians, enemies versus allies. But in her trembling voice he heard the truth. Loss didn't choose sides. Pain was the same, no matter what skin it wore. For the first time since the war began, Aaron didn't feel like his grief was his alone. It was shared. Different worlds. Same ache. Her hand moved then, almost uncertain, but it found his. Her skin was cool against his calloused palm, but the touch burned through the emptiness he carried. "You fight," she said quietly. "Because you don't know how to stop, but maybe you fight because you cannot let go of the ones you loved." Aaron's eyes stung. He wanted to deny it, to push away the weight of her words. But she was right. Every mission, every step forward had been him chasing ghosts, refusing to stop because stopping meant admitting they were gone. "And you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Why are you still holding on?" Her gaze met his, steady even as her voice wavered. Because if I stop, then her death means nothing. If I stop, then I am nothing. But if I keep walking, if I keep believing, then maybe I can still honor her. The room felt smaller then, not from its walls but from the closeness between them. Two broken souls speaking truths they had buried. Aaron let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. I don't know how to live with all of it. Sarah squeezed his hand gently, her touch trembling but firm. Then don't do it alone. Her words sank deep, deeper than any wound. For years he had carried the weight by himself, convinced that no one could share it. But now here was someone different, alien, yet the same in her grief, offering him something he hadn't allowed himself to imagine. Not salvation, not forgiveness, but companionship. And in that moment, sitting in the ruins of a dead station, Aaron realized that maybe the universe hadn't taken everything from him. Maybe it had given him one last chance to feel human again. The station did not sleep. Even when the lights dimmed to mark night cycle, the walls groaned, the air vents hissed, and the faint echo of distant metal shifts whispered through the corridors. Aaron had grown used to the sounds, but this time something was different. A sudden alarm blared, sharp and jarring. Red warning lights flashed across the corridors. Aaron was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the door. The sound wasn't random. It was the proximity alarm. Something had entered orbit. Sarah sat up, her silver eyes wide. What is it? Kethrian scouts, Aaron muttered, his gut twisting. He had heard this sound too many times before. It always meant the same thing. Danger was coming. They found us. Saris rose unsteadily, bracing herself against the desk. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. How long until they breach? Aaron glanced at the terminal. The station's sensors were barely functioning, but the readings were enough. He could see at least one dropship descending, maybe more. Hours. Maybe less. His chest tightened. He had expected this. He had told himself the outpost was only a temporary refuge, that the enemy would come eventually. But now, staring at Saris, he realized what that meant. If they stayed, she would be caught, and if she was caught, she would be executed. He turned, checking his rifle, his pack, his grenades. He could make a stand. He had made stands before. Maybe he could buy her enough time to escape through the ducts, to hide again. That was something he knew how to do. Fight, bleed, and die, so someone else could keep living. But then her voice cut through his thoughts. You're going out there, aren't you? Aaron froze, his jaw tightening. It's the only way. Her eyes burned with sudden anger. Why do you throw yourself away so easily? He opened his mouth to answer, but she stepped closer, her voice sharp and trembling at the same time. Do you think dying is the only thing you're good for? Do you think your life is worth less than mine? Less than anyone's? That's what they say about humans. That you rush into fire because you have nothing else. Aaron's chest ached. He wanted to argue, to tell her she didn't understand. But she did. He could see it in her eyes. Loss, grief, the same shadows. He carried. I fight because I don't know how to stop, he admitted, his voice rough. Every day since Elias died, since my squad fell, I wake up and I keep going. Not because I believe we can win, not because I want to, but because... What else is there? Her expression softened, but her words stayed firm. There is more. You are dangerous to them, yes, but not because you fight without care. You are dangerous because you survive. Because no matter how much you lose, you keep standing. That frightens them more than your guns ever will. The truth in her words hit him harder than any blow. For years, he had thought of himself as a weapon, sharp, expendable, made only to fight until he broke. But she was telling him something else, that his survival, his refusal to give up, had meaning beyond the pain. He lowered his rifle slightly, his hands trembling. What do you want? Me to do? Just run? Her eyes locked on his, steady and fierce. Not run, live, with me. If we are going to fight, we fight to escape, not to die here. Together. Aaron stared at her, his breath uneven. He had faced enemies without fear, had walked through battlefields with death at his side. But now, in this small room with a single bed and a single chance, he felt afraid for the first time in years, not of dying but of believing. Finally, he nodded. The decision felt heavier than any weapon he had ever carried, but it was also lighter, as though a weight had shifted off his shoulders. For the first time since Elias's voice had gone silent, Aaron wasn't preparing to die. He was preparing to live. The alarm still blared, the enemy still closed in. But something had changed. Aaron was no longer fighting for ghosts. He was fighting for her. And maybe for himself too. The station shook as the first impact rattled through its frame. Somewhere deep below, metal screamed against metal, and the floor vibrated beneath their boots. The Kethrians were here. They didn't have much time. Aaron stood at the terminal, his fingers flying across the cracked screen. He rerouted what little power remained, forcing it away from useless corridors and into the docking bay. The system protested, alarms flashing, but he ignored them. Sarah stayed close, her eyes darting to the door every time a distant clang echoed. "Will it work?" she asked. Aaron gritted his teeth. "It has to. There's a shuttle left in bay. 2. It's damaged, but if we can get it running, it might just break the blockade." "Might is not enough," she whispered, fear tightening her voice. Aaron glanced at her, and for a moment he softened. "It's all we've got." They moved quickly through the corridors, the station alive with warning sirens. Smoke filled, some halls, sparks raining down from torn wires above. Twice they had to duck behind fallen beams as the old station groaned under the pressure of the landing enemy ships. Every second felt stolen, every breath too loud. When they reached the docking bay, Aaron's chest tightened. The shuttle sat crooked on the platform, half buried under debris, one engine dark. The hull was scarred from earlier battles. It looked like a coffin more than a ship, but it was their only chance. Aaron leapt onto the deck and forced open the hatch. The lights inside flickered weakly, the control panels cracked but still breathing with a faint glow. He tossed his rifle to the side and dropped into the pilot's chair, running diagnostics. Engines are crippled, shield generators fried, but life support works, and he gave a faint smile. One engine still runs. Cirrus climbed in behind him, lowering herself into the co-pilot's seat. Her hands hovered over the controls. Uncertain. "I don't know how to fly this." "Then watch me," Aaron said, his voice steady despite the chaos pounding outside. The docking bay doors shuddered as heavy steps echoed down the corridors. The Kethrians were close now. Aaron could almost feel their presence, the way the air seemed to thicken with the coming of death. "Hold on," he muttered, fingers tightening on the controls. The shuttle roared, weakly at first, then louder, as if awakening from a long sleep. The surviving engine coughed, then burned alive, shaking the entire craft. Aaron slammed the launch sequence and the shuttle lifted, scraping against debris as it pulled free. The docking doors began to open. Slowly, too slowly. Behind them, a deep metallic boom shook the bay. Cirrus flinched, turning to see armored figures stepping into the hangar, weapons glowing. "They're here!" she shouted. "I see them!" Aaron barked. His finger jammed the thrusters, pushing the shuttle forward, even as enemy fire lit up the bay. Energy bolts seared past, one slamming into the hull with a deafening crack. Warning lights screamed red across the panel. Come on," Aaron hissed. The shuttle scraped through the half-open doors, tearing metal as it forced its way out. Then, with a burst of fire, they broke free into the void of space. But freedom was not waiting. The blockade loomed ahead, sleek Kethrian warships surrounding the planet like wolves around a wounded prey. Their weapons turned, sensors locking on the small shuttle that dared to escape. "Aaron," Cirrus whispered, fear wrapping around her words. He didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on the stars beyond the blockade, on the thin path between destruction and survival. His voice was steady, calm in a way only humans could manage in the face of death. "We're going through." Missiles streaked toward them, glowing trails cutting across the black. Aaron jerked the shuttle left, then right, the old controls groaning as the ship danced between fire. Saris clung to her seat, her heart pounding. Every explosion felt like the end, but somehow, he kept them moving. The ship screamed, hull cracking under the stress, alarms wailing louder than ever. Aaron's hands never shook, his eyes burned with focus, with that strange human defiance she had only begun to understand. They punched through the first line, then the second. A final missile clipped their wing, sending the shuttle spinning. Saris cried out, gripping the console, but Aaron slammed his fist against the stabilizer, forcing the ship to straighten. His teeth clenched, sweat running down his brow, and then stars. Clear, open, endless. The blockade fell behind them, warships shrinking into the dark. The shuttle groaned, damaged but alive, carrying them into freedom. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by their ragged breaths. Saris turned to him, her eyes wide, shining not only with fear but with something else, belief. Aaron leaned back, his chest heaving. For the first time in years, he allowed himself a small, tired smile. "Told you," he said softly. "It had to work." Saris stared at him, her lips trembling into a faint smile of her own. In that moment, she saw what her people had never understood. Humans didn't survive because they loved war. They survived because, no matter how impossible the odds, they refused to stop moving forward. And sitting there beside him, Saris realized she believed in him. Completely. The stars stretched out before them, endless and unbroken. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The shuttle rattled with every small movement, alarms still blinking weakly, but the silence between them was alive, thick with relief, with disbelief, with the strange weight of survival. Aaron's hands stayed firm on the controls, though his body begged for rest. His vision blurred from exhaustion, but he refused to let go. He had been through battles before, but this felt different. He wasn't fighting for orders or for revenge or for the hollow idea of victory. He was fighting because someone beside him still breathed, someone who had placed her trust in him. Saris finally broke the quiet, her voice soft but steady. "We made it." Aaron let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The corners of his mouth pulled into a faint smile. "Yeah, we did." Her silver eyes studied him for a long moment. She had seen him in the darkest corridors carrying more ghosts than any man should. She had seen him face death without flinching, pilot a broken shuttle through fire and steel. And now, as the stars opened wide, she saw him not as a weapon, not as a soldier, but as a man. "You should not be alive," she whispered half to herself. Aaron gave a small laugh, dry and tired. "Story of my life." She leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes briefly. "My people say humans fight because they are reckless, because they cannot see beyond their own need for conflict. But now I think, maybe they fight because they cannot bear to let anyone face the dark alone."